The Rendile are people that are found in Kenya, in East Africa. And their importance is very, very important, especially if we're looking at the religions of Cushitics and Afroasiatics. Now, these people have been found to have what some might call typical Afroasiatic genetics, and then they have an extra dose of Nilotic and Bantu DNA, which means they are not pure Afroasiatics, but they carry a history in them that was lost in the Somalian areas, not fully, obviously, but due to a lot of invasion from Islamic religion, Christianity, and all these other things, it was hard to get what religion people had or practiced prior to becoming what they were. Now, the Rendile had the luxury that they were around the Bantus, and the Bantus weren't really too big on converting people into whatever religion they want them to become. And so the Rendile, until the 20th century, maintained their own religion of the Wak. Now, this is how we know that this Waka religion that is found in Somalia, Ethiopia, and other places like that has to do with Kushitics, because we find Kushitics who are not in the Kushitic areas practicing it up until the 20th century. Another practice that they do relating to their religion has to do with Lubu or Lib. This is an Afroasiatic word. Lubu means soul. Lib, and it, every Afroasiatic version has a version of it, of this word meaning soul.
Hey guys, welcome to my channel. It's me, Adikento. So today I'm going to teach you some of the Rendile words and sentences. For example, in Rendile, a person, it's one person, we say enenyet, enenyet. A group of people, we say dot, do they, dot. Yeah. If it's a
Afroasiatic groups in general go through something called infibulation. Now, this infibulation method we've seen take place in people like the Somali, for example, and other groups, but it's also there in the Rendile. And this was thought to have come from ancient Egypt because this is the oldest we find it happening. Some researchers have traced the practice to Egypt in the 5th century BC and argue that the geographical distribution of FGM suggests that it originated on the west coast of the Red Sea. Egyptian mummies show woman infibulated, and this is supported by a Greek papyrus in the British Museum dated 163 BC. So you can see that it's kind of a late practice that, well, we don't know how early it started, but it's kind of a late practice and that it spread throughout the Nilotic areas and other Afroasiatic regions. Of course, we do know that today a lot of people living in Egypt still practice this. According to the Egyptian Family Health Survey, EFHS 2021, 86% of Egyptian married women between the ages of 15 and 49 have undergone FGM, 74% of whom by doctors. Now, FGM in the context of the Afroasiatic style is also known as infibulation. This is a narrowing of the vaginal opening through the creation of a covering seal. The seal is formed by cutting and repositioning the labia minora or labia majora, sometimes through stitching with or without removal of the clitoral prepuce, clitoral hood, and glands. So let's talk about the religious components, the part that matter. Well, the Wak, which we see in the Rendile, we see in some of the Oromo tribes, we see in Somalia, and we see in other, let's say, Horn of Africa, Cushitic peoples in different capacities that It's a pre-Abrahamic monotheistic religion, very complicated one, where this monotheistic sky god is associated with a lot of things that have to do with nature in general, including water, rain, fertility, trees, animals, nature, harmony, and all other things. But where exactly did this belief come from? If we have a monotheistic religion that is being represented by Afro-Asiatics and it's pre-Abrahamic, meaning it has nothing to do with Judaism and it has nothing to do with Islam or Christianity, and it was written about. Now, if we go to Wikipedia and we look up monotheism, what you will see is there's in Africa, there's three that are mentioned, which is from the Tukur people, that talk about the single worship of Nui, the Himba, where there's a monotheistic and panentheism worship of Mukuru, or in Zulu, it's Nkulunkulu, which is also a monotheistic religion, but we'll get back to the Zulus. The Igbo Odinani and Wak in the Horn of Africa. And then, of course, they go to the Aten in Africa. Now, I want to tell you that some of these I wouldn't agree are monotheistic, but let's first dive into what is monotheistic. Now, we know that the Aten is 100% monotheistic. It's monotheistic in the sense that, in terms of deity, they have one God. See, the problem with the word monotheistic is it's very tricky because what does that mean? Well, in this case of the Aten, when we say monotheistic, we mean you don't really worship anything else but the Aten. Eh, Or you can then expand that to you can use intermediaries, but they're all intermediaries to the Aten. In the case of the Rendile, I would still consider it monotheistic in the same sense that the Christians use the word monotheistic, but I wouldn't consider it monotheistic in the same sense that the Aten is monotheistic, in the sense that the Wak people still believed in ancestral worship. They believed in the divinity of animals, and they believed in those type of things. So technically, they would be monotheistic because those things are not necessarily gods in the same way. In other words, they're not gods with narratives. They're just thought to be magical in some way, but they're not gods. That's why they're considered monotheistic. And in the third one, the Mukuru, Unkulunkulu, the Bantus are just known to be monotheistic in their religion. Now, the reason why they're considered monotheistic is because 90% of the Bantus, if they believe in a god, which again, some of them don't because one is very close to zero, but if they believe in a god, they believe in a one god, usually associated with the sun, and this god usually has a name start with NY something, with the exception of Ngorongoro or Makuru in, as you can see, in the Himba religion. These gods would all be considered monotheistic by Judeo religious laws, in the sense that you can still have totems and items and idols as long as you worship one god. So now that I've clarified that, I want to first talk about the similarities between the Egyptian one and those other African ones that I mentioned, in the sense that those African religions, if we compare that, let's call them all polytheistic for now. If we compare the polytheistic version of the Egyptian religion, so we remove the Aten is the supreme, even in the polytheistic religions of ancient Egypt. The animals like Horus and stuff like that, they represent animism. And then there's ancestral worship as well of the pharaohs and stuff like that in ancient Egypt, right? Reverence of the dead and all this other stuff that they care about a lot. If we take this to the African religions, we see that there's a supreme god, usually related with the sun, and then there is something that we would call a veneration for lower things, not spirits necessarily that have a identity of their own, but ancestors and animism. So animism and ancestors. If we go to somewhere like China, right, where people claim that there's a monotheistic religion called or the worship of Shangdi, the problem with this is Shangdi is not monotheistic. Shangdi is merely a supreme god. And there's a difference between a supreme god and a monotheistic religion. This guy is a supreme god who's worshipped, but then there are D's which are under him. Shangdi is the highest, but D's are below him. So he's the supreme god, and then there's lower gods under him. If we look at the Indo-European, which some people claim is um, another monotheistic religion, which is absolutely incorrect. The It's not monotheistic because Deus, in most places, was not even the main guy, as I've shown you in some other ones. But Deus Peter or Deus Pater, who is known as the head of the gods, the father of the gods, Pater, father, just like patron, whatever, those words, we know them. Peter, Pater, patriarch, words that mean father. Deus Pater, the father of the gods, meaning there's more than one gods in those religions. It's just that he's the head. This is very different, very, very different than what I'm talking about, but they add this in here. Now, were there other starter examples that faded into nowhere? Perhaps, but these are not them. This does not count. Most of these are definitely not. Now, I'll give you one exception: Buddhism, which Buddhism is, I would claim again, all this is very technical. Buddhism would count as an atheistic religion. Now you gotta say, what the hell does that mean? Well, Buddhism doesn't have a god. Buddhism has all the beliefs of a religion except a god. So it'd be an atheistic religion. And this happens a lot in Africa where there's a veneration of items, of an understanding of the underworld, an understanding of people die and come back from the dead and all this, but they don't have a god. Now, if you take the word atheism, what does that mean, atheism? Or the word theism, right? Let's take, uh, you know, the word theism. Well, to be a theist, right? You have to believe in a god. The word theist comes from the word deity. So you have to believe in a deity. If you don't believe in a deity, then you're an atheist. 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 But the problem with this again is that this is very technical wording and it depends on who you ask. If you ask me, I would say that most of these religions are not atheistic, and I would say the Aten is the only monotheistic religion in that it forced people to look at one. But if we're gonna let it go, I would say that a lot of the African religions are atheistic, and then they're monotheistic, and then they're polytheistic, depending on which one you're talking about. And then if you go to Judaism, that's a type of monotheism, right? If you let it go. If you let it go, Christianity is a type of monotheism. If you let it go, Islam is a type of monotheism. If you let it go, almost all of these are a type of monotheism. But the other ones that were mentioned, the Deus Pita and the Shangdi, nope. Those two do not count. Those two are definitely not part of the atheistic thing that's going on right now. But This is only a small thing. Let's go back to the Bantu people for 1 second. Using Buddhism as a reference, let's go through a bit of what I'm talking about, and we're going to look at some notes that talk about Ngurunguru. So if we look at that Ngurunguru or Makuru, and this will then go into other Bantu gods, but I'm not going to look up I'm just using this one as a symbol for all the others. If we look at what that means, we know that in the Bantu mythology, that means that that is quote unquote the supreme god. But this word was thrown onto the word by the Europeans. That was not actually what it means. Ngurunguru means the supreme, the supreme man, not the supreme god. And this man came from the reeds. He's the first man, the first ancestor to appear. And there's multiple opinions about how he appeared because, like that other guy showed you, a lot of these people practiced religions that are more attuned to what they feel like. It wasn't as forced religion back in the day as you think, but they had a general accepted thing. Now, the Gulungulu, in some people, when you ask them, the older generation, when this was asked in the 1800s, when they were asked, their Nkulunkulu were their first ancestors. So Makeba would be an example, and then there were some even further than that, depending on like Ndo would be an example of Nkulunkulu. So they would start with a human being who is the Nkulunkulu, the head of their religion, quote unquote, and he wasn't necessarily venerated. He was seen as the oldest, but he wasn't necessarily praised, which is kind of what you have to do in order to be considered a god, even if you're a god king.
My problem with Buddhism was that although so much of what Buddha said made a lot of sense,
Okay.
at the end of the day, Buddha was a human being. And he'd admitted this himself, right? He's just coming up with the best guess that he could, contemplating and thinking and whatever, it came from his own understanding,
Okay.
right? And so he came up with this, the eightfold enlightened path based upon certain principles that he came up with, things that he understood. And he claimed it, in a sense, it's almost like he was saying it's fitra. He says that anyone will understand this, right? But at the end of the day, I was trying to understand what is the purpose of life? Why are we here? What's it all for? What's the reason for our existence? And although Buddha comes up with some answers, my real problem at the end of the day was still, well, how do you know? How do you really know, right? How can you be sure?
If we believe that Buddha is a God, they can bestow on us the things we want, then that is not the Buddha. The Buddha is a human being who has a deep capacity of understanding and of loving. And having Mahakaruna, great compassion, Maitri, great love, Mahaprajna, great understanding, he can perform miracles. Understanding people is a miracle. And it is described that the Buddha is one who understands the world well.
The problem is that there are words that are meant to be catch all. So, in other words, they're supposed to surround something and go, that's what a religion is, that's what this is, that's what that is. Now, though Buddhism is a religion, though these Bantu religions are religions, though the Aten's religion would be a religion, though Judaism is a religion and Christianity is a religion, these concepts are very different from each other. So if we had to sort them out one by one so that we get a full summary of what I was talking about, the pluralistic Christianity would be considered the least atheistic or monotheistic of these, having the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be three different gods, and in some cases, the veneration of Mary and other humans would make it even more pluralistic, and even angels, praying to angels, would be considered not monotheistic, not in the same sense as other ones. So, and then we go down from that, we would have the Wak and other Bantu mythologies, including the Nkulunkulu one, where right there you have the Nkulunkulu guys who worship a single god, and has many names. I'm not going to list them all. They all mean the first to arrive, a single God, right? And then after that, you have animism, ancestral worship. Then we go below that, and we would have a religion which has, just like Buddhism, no real deities or anything like that, but instead has systems built in place that are admitted to not be real, in the sense of they might be a deep understanding or they might not be, because the Buddha was technically an atheist and he kind of pushed that mythology or whatever you want to call it. Then you go down a step further, you find again the Bantu mythologies where they venerate a man like Buddha in their ancestor, and they don't believe in any of the other stuff. They're animists in that sense, right? In that they believe in animism, but it ends there. They do not have a god. Even this Kulunkulu guy of theirs is just a representative of their oldest ancestor by name, whatever he is. So let's say you believe your oldest ancestor is Solomon. That would be your Nkulunkulu. That would be your whatever. An actual human being. Not a belief in a god, not a belief in the supreme creator, not the idea that lightning happens because someone made it happen, but instead dealing with direct human existence. Now, all of these, for some reason, are considered religions in one giant batch. If this is complicated, don't blame me.